I wanted to make a beautiful mess, if you will. Just like figure out how to make a beautiful chaos, but somehow have it come through clear and coherent.
Welcome to Academy Panels. I'm your host, Sean Finney, and Executive Vice President of Membership and Awards. Today I have the unique honor and privilege of sitting down with the documentary category of this year's Oscars nominees. And yeah, we're gonna go into kind of like what they do. I think you kind of know that, but we're really gonna go into who they are and how that has brought them to this space here. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you for coming from all over to be here. The first question I really wanna ask you all is, as a filmmaker, you have your own challenges, your own unique challenges as a filmmaker, period. As a documentary filmmaker, there's a whole other journey there. And I wanted to know, with the films this year that you all are nominated for, what was the biggest challenge that you all had getting your films made and created?
Speaking in real time, I'll say that for me at least, the element of time or numbers kind of dictated where I should go creatively. Because for my specific film, which is a story that starts with 40 hours of footage sitting in a basement for 50 years, and then finding people who are still here to talk about it, but then me having a storyline that I thought I was going to do, and then time dictates otherwise, because once the pandemic started, my creative Jenga completely went away. I lost people that I was going to interview and all those things, and it was moments where I thought we weren't going to have a film, and then time just dictated a whole nother story. And then you add on to the elements that happened in 2020, which, there was just a point where what we were editing and what we were living through were neck and neck with each other. And I'm talking about like unarmed killings, mistrust in the government with the election, the virus, like everything that was happening in 2020. So we kind of just had to go with where time took us. And so for me, it was just going with the wind and where the universe wanted to go.
I think one of the biggest challenges that we faced was the complexity of putting together a story that was so unique to the cultural context and specificity of India, and yet trying to build it together in a way that would speak to audiences across the globe. It's a story that talks about gender and caste and technology and the fourth estate, but there's too much happening. And I think we decided to edit just before the pandemic, and we got stuck in a house in the mountains because we had set up an edit studio at a friend's place. And so the plan was we'll edit over there away from the city. And then India locked down overnight, and it's just, we had no choice. We just started putting the film together, and I think that was our little island. And it's a love letter to India, and I don't know if we would have been able to do it any other way. I don't know, what do you think?
After you shoot for 4 years, your footage can be so deceiving. There's a lot to unpack, and to bring it all together into a seamless narrative. And the fact that we both directed, produced, and were editing the film, but also, partners stuck in the pandemic. It was a lot going on. So that was just bringing the film together was a huge challenge. And the other day, I think someone told me that I totally got through the 17th layer in the film, and I got your film, which I thought was finally, that challenge was crossed, yeah.
Yeah, in a similar manner, for me, the editing was, I think, the most challenging thing. As most people know, the film is often found in the editing. Not to say that the shooting is always so easy, but since in my film I didn't have central characters or central plot line even, I had to impose this kind of external structure that was coming from me rather than coming from actions or people that happened in the film. And the editing style was modular. I had different scenes, different vignettes that I could kind of move around, shuffle around. And it was this push-pull, almost like a tightrope balance between editing things based off of this rigid structure that I imposed off of it, which later I found the structure was ascension and ascending the class ladder in the film, but also things that were more leaning into the psychedelic elements of it or free associative elements of it. So I never knew if it was going to work until it finally clicked at the end. And that's one of the hardest things about making kind of an unconventional film like this, is it's a puzzle piece that you don't know if you will be able to solve it until you finally do. And so the whole time it was kind of this leap of faith that I was taking, that there was a light at the end of the tunnel, but you know, at the end of the day it had to come both from my gut and what my instinct was kind of telling me made sense, even if it didn't always completely make sense or something that I could articulate, and also you know, this disciplined sense of this outside structure that I was imposing onto it.
I love that, and as you were saying that, I was looking around the room and I'm like, you all probably feel the same way, where you don't really know what it is until it's probably put together, and you have this idea that you're going forward, but then it's kind of coming together as it's being built.
The overall biggest thing was COVID, you know, for us. So we were about to shoot in April of 2020, and COVID struck, you know, like a demon in March, and I was thinking as we were all talking, you know, it changed as COVID changed. What we had to do to battle COVID changed, you know? So at first, COVID strikes and we're like, oh, well, can we still shoot? And then we're like, okay, no, we can't shoot. And you remember the time where we were wiping off apples and I get the newspaper delivered, I'd sponge down the newspaper in the morning. Right, each page, and we couldn't do anything, you know, like nothing. So COVID was like constant for us. And then there were other challenges, but COVID never went away. You know, so COVID was always a challenge.
The pandemic for sure was the biggest challenge for all the reasons he mentioned. Also, the heart of our film is the archival footage. All the archives were closed. So we had to work around that. The film is about an event that happened 50 years ago, so pretty much everyone in the film is in an age group that makes them especially vulnerable to the virus, and that was a huge concern for me as the person responsible for figuring out how to make sure that you know, we got the interviews done, but in a way that kept everybody safe, not only the subjects but the crew as well. And yeah, it was wiping down every single piece of equipment. We filmed in these huge spaces, whereas we normally would film something more intimate, just one person a day in that space when we would have done two. I mean, it was really nerve-wracking to have to negotiate that. So definitely the pandemic. But I'll also say that the pandemic offered clarity as well, right? Because we're doing a film about prisoners demanding recognition of their humanity. And we know when the pandemic broke out, people in prisons were left to get sick and die. So it really kind of offered a challenge, but also this resonance about how the film in the past is really in conversation with what was going on today.
And perspective. You know, perspective about where we are and what's happening.
To me, you know, Flea is an animated documentary, and it was really, you know, to make an animated film. Not so much the decision to do it, but to actually kind of do it, because I'd never done animation before. So to really, you know, understand a new craft. I've been working in documentary for, you know, a decade, and I kind of knew that. But then, you know, to walk into something else, which is totally different and a totally different kind of approach to filmmaking. And understand that. And you know, in the beginning, it was just Amin and me in my living room doing these conversations, and he kind of started to open up the story. And in the beginning, I thought, okay, but we could maybe do an animated short. And then he gave me this testimony, and I realized, okay, but this is something bigger, and I need to pay tribute to that, and kind of say, okay, but we need to spend the time, and I need to really understand the craft of what I started here. So just really to kind of find a style of animation that could support this testimony and make sure that because he's my friend, that it was told in a way where he felt recognized and represented. I think so. Just kind of, it felt like new land, and it took 8 years to make the film, 9 years to make the film, but it was what was needed to do it.
Yeah, what I'm hearing a lot is about like the flexibility required, you know, for each and every one of you individually, whether it was COVID because the archive was closed, whether there's multiple cities, you know, and representing a community and a culture all in its own. I'm curious as to like, do you all feel, because as an audience, you know, you take us on a ride, you take us on a journey, you bring us through the scope of where you all are. What draws you to your subject that you decide to explore?
I always say that you know, if any filmmaker tells you like one thing that draws you to make a film, they're lying. You know, or just simplifying it, you know, because it's really complicated. You know, it's, you know, for archival film, is there archive? Are there witnesses? Can you raise the money? You know, which nobody wants to talk about. You know, there's a lot of things that go into saying, okay, this is the film I want to make. I think for me, one of the things that's helped is the first film I ever made took me 7 years to make, right? And 7 years, and it was on PBS, you know, in prime time, you know, and so I was like, I mean, I was literally, when it aired, sitting there looking at the telephone, you know, because I knew the phone was going to ring, you know. Now I was on my way. I was just like, okay, you know, it's going to ring. And the phone didn't ring. And so the next film that I made took me another 7 years. So in a way, I go into projects thinking it may be 7 years, it may be 10 years. So I want to do something that at least is important enough for me, to me, so that I don't abandon it after 5 years and it's just a waste of time.
I think with my project, disbelief was sort of the basis of it. Because even when it was pitched to me, I thought, well, there's no way you're going to convince me that sometime there was a free concert with Sly and the Family Stone and Stevie Wonder and 300,000 people in Harlem seeing it and not one person has a photo or any evidence of it. So I went in with arms crossed, like there's no way that you're going to convince me this happened. And even when they brought the footage, I thought, well, okay, the sound must be awful, or maybe the cameras are, you know, horrible. And when I saw the footage and how amazing it was, then I went through, you know, the whole, like, why me? Like, why am I like, what's the catch here? Like, there's a whole world of directors you could have chosen. Like, why are you coming to a first-time driver who just got his permit 1 second ago? And then I realized, I mean, not only in terms of restoring history, but there were so many questions I had. I mean, just as a curiosity, one, the main question I wanted to answer was, you know, how easy is it to be dismissive of Black history to the point where it's just like, no big deal. But then it was also figuring out how to tell a story so that I can reach, because, you know, there's different generations you're dealing with. You're dealing with the fortunate few, you're dealing with baby boomers, you're dealing with Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z, and post-Gen Z. So it's like, how am I going to hit a grand slam that will hit all of these people? And then, you know, I guess the music nerd in me also just wanted to know, you know, did Stevie Wonder have donuts on his rider? Or what were the sleeping conditions like for the staple singers and those things? So there were so many questions I had, historical, political, creatively. You know, I had to include the story of how a lost wallet winds up being one of the biggest singles for, you know, the Fifth Dimension. So there were so many different rails that I had to plug into just to, I wanted to make a beautiful mess, if you will. Just like figure out how to make a beautiful chaos, but somehow have it come through clear and coherent that it reached all 6 generations.
And that the audience could capture and understand what the story is that you're threading.
I was definitely nervous about, like, are we trying to pack too much?
Yeah.
But, you know, the people have told me otherwise, that they received it, so I'm glad.
I think it was received.
I was nervous though.
I love that, how you say it's a beautiful mess.
I love chaos. So I think that, you know, chaos and creativity. Like, I grew up on Public Enemy, a group that, like, puts 19 samples in one song, and my dad's like this, but I'm like, yes. So it just seems normal to me.
For our film, one of the things that I really love about it is that in some ways we're asking, we're making a difficult ask of the audience, which is to sympathize with people who are prisoners. You know, this is not a film about wrongfully incarcerated people. This is a film about people who committed a crime, went to prison, but at the same time are saying that they still deserve recognition of their personhood and their humanity. And something that I think I really didn't recognize until I had some distance from the film and came back to it was that the people at the center of this film live at the intersection of identities that we often don't get to see show the kind of range of humanity that you see. So these are men. These are men of a certain age. They're all older men. They're all, most of them men of color, and they're all prisoners. So any one of those groups, we rarely get to see sort of this type of like range of humanity. You see the humor, you see the rage, you see the shame, you see all of these things, let alone people that exist at the intersection of all four of those identities. So I think that's really one of the things that really drew me to the story. And
You've also seen them really band together too. You know, the community within that community is very interesting to see as well.
Yeah. And I don't think until I kind of stepped back and then came back to it, I don't think I really realized how much I love that about the film, that you get to see the fullness of who all of these people are, and they're people that we just really don't often get to see that kind of nuanced humanity from.
Storytelling about, yeah.
I agree with what Stanley was saying earlier about how there's never really just one reason why a filmmaker can dive into a project and spend years and years of their life living with it. But for me, there were so many facets, and one of them is my interest in worlds that we're connected to without realizing it, and specifically supply chains and the length of the supply chains. I made a short film a few years ago in the world's largest wholesale in the mall, which is in Yiwu, China. And from there, I was really fascinated by this paradox of the intimacy that I had seeing all of these familiar day-to-day objects in a new kind of space that I had never been to before. And also the intimacy of the family scenes kind of spilling out in the stalls where people are selling things from plastic bags to buttons to mouse traps. And so from there, I became more interested in connecting the dots between these invisible economies that power day-to-day consumer life. And that's why in Ascension, the film is kind of bookended by these two locations, one of which is a low-wage labor market where people are looking for jobs at places like Huawei or Foxconn, which make iPhones, and then ends in a rare earths mineral mine. And rare earths are what are used to make smartphones. So just really immersing the audience in these sort of physical spaces. So I was kind of ultimately looking at the paradox of economic progress. And I think a place like China, because of its compressed time frame of how much it's really changed in the past few decades since the Reform and Open of 1979, I think that when a society changes so drastically, these kind of universal questions related to the paradox of progress are magnified. And so in that sense, I kind of, even though the film's about China, I think it's also about the West. And I really hope for people to see it as a mirror of themselves in the West.
You all are like visual educators. You know, you pull the lid back on things that people may or may not have known, whether it's a mean story, whether it's you didn't know about this concert many years ago, you know, whether it's the economy that you're talking about right there. I want to come to you, though, because I know that she answered, but I want to come specifically to you to get your idea of what drew you as it relates to this subject.
I mean, we came from a school of short nonfiction, and our sense of storytelling was, 6 months to a year, we'd be able to complete a film and move on. And I wish when we started in 2015, we'd met Stanley. He would have told us it takes 7, because we gave ourselves 2 years. And then at the end of it, we were like, one more year. I think it was a cathartic process for me, because I was in a space where, the world felt very fractured. And as a filmmaker, my idea of storytelling is also this idea of how do you create hope in the times that we are living in. But where do you find hope if it's become such a rare element now? And so being with protagonists who were infused with the power of, or the idea of what life can be, and coming from spaces of such deep trauma and marginalization, and then opening doors for us and pathways of like imagining new worlds of what democracies could be like and look like. And a lot of times we end up intellectualizing or theorizing all of these things in our homes, but you know, here were women who were right out there in the forefront, in the battlefield, so to speak, showing us the way. It was a process of sort of like re-energizing as a storyteller, being with them, and the joy of being able to then reframe the narrative around, you know, whose story is this, and more importantly, reframing the context, because in popular culture, Dalit women have always been represented in a certain way. You don't see them as women who are imbued with inherent power. You don't see them championing certain values, and I think that was also one of the challenges that we had. How do you do it in a way that is elegant and dignified like they are? And you know, you're not like shouting out, "Oh, such cool women," but it needs to be there infused in the film. So I learned a lot from them, and I think that's been the great joy of, I think that's the joy of being a documentary filmmaker as well. Like you can never script these things. Like life happens and you just embrace it and you learn and you grow. And I think that's been, you know, something that's been a process of self-discovery for me as well. Especially being a man telling a story that, you know, in a group of women. So, yeah.
Can you talk about that joy of that and being able to pull the lid back and give voice to the voiceless or those who just may not have been recognized before? I'm curious, do you all think that documentaries should be subjective? Like, what's the difference for you all between a biopic and a documentary?
In terms of facts versus what we think?
I think it's really difficult to do an objective documentary, because as soon as you point your camera in a certain direction and as soon as you make a cut, you know, it's a decision you make from your perspective. And you know, someone else than a Min could have experienced the same thing as a Min, and someone else would have then told his story, and it would be a very different film. But they could be equally honest. But
Invulnerable?
yeah. So I think it really comes from, where do you tell the story from? Do you tell it because you wanted to use it as a tool to convince someone about something? Then it becomes problematic because then it's biased. But if you kind of go into it open-minded, listen carefully, then it becomes honest. And it's difficult to talk about truth in documentary, because this word, like, what does it mean? Because we will all have different experiences about this talk we have right now. Which one is true? But they can all be honest. We can have honest experiences. So I think, to me, I like to use the word honest more. And I feel like all the films we have around the table here are very honest films. You know, we don't try to convince anyone about something. It's really kind of, this is the world. We open a door to something else, and we want to invite the audience to see it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in Attica, you know, we wanted to take this event that happened in 5 days. I mean, Attica was 5 days, and it's self-contained, and I think we wanted to tell a 360-degree story. You know, we wanted the inmate story, we wanted the hostage family story, we wanted the newsmen, we wanted the observers, we wanted all those stories, and we wanted to tell those stories honestly. But I think that one of the things that I've tried to do, and I've done a number of historical documentaries, is what I call the illusion of objectivity. You know, so there is an illusion of objectivity in the film, but it's not objective. You know, finally, like you say, you know, you're making hundreds of decisions a day. You know, if you say, okay, I want to add 5 frames or not add 5 frames, or let the music, or put the music a little louder. So it's all subjective, but it's really important for these documents, for Attica to be, at least have the illusion of objectivity for people who see it, you know.
I think in my case, in terms of the $1 million question, which is, you know, why don't we know about this event? There really isn't a straight answer. But I do think, and this is what I had to learn while doing the process of filming, because I personally didn't think that we were going to get to an emotional element. So we may not have answered a question as in, okay, so this happened, and what happened? Like, what happened between point A and point B, where, you know, this erasure happened? But I think what we've replaced it with was how people felt. And I think that's the jackpot moment. You know, when Merle McCoo is talking about sort of a culture, well, switch, or not switch hitting, code switching. When she speaks up, you know, until she had that moment, I was like, wow, okay, you're a renowned celebrity superstar, and you go through the same things I go through at the job sometimes, because, you know, I catch myself. A comedian once told me that, you know, we talk, black people coming already equipped with ebonics and job interview. So, you know, I find myself sometimes in the hallways at 30 Rock, like, hello there, hello, how are you? And then until the room's like, mother, you know, like 3 seconds later. But I think in my specific case, it's more about how people felt. And I think that's what's resonating, how beautiful it was, how this certain thing made you feel, how watching an artist made you feel, how being seen, being heard, being believed. So, yeah, I don't think any particular questions got answered, but because people, and maybe it's rare for black people to actually share how they feel, because oftentimes, you know, we're seen as caricatures and unrelatable. So something happened, and the timing of it coming, you know, when it came out also helped as well. But I think it's more about, for my case, it's about how they felt more than a question that I could answer.
This question for me was settled like many, many years ago in school when the professor actually told all of us, there was this big window, and she was like, look outside the window, I'm giving you 5 minutes. And then she gave us some time, and she's like, write a story about what you saw of the world. And there were 45 of us. And then she was like, everyone has to share their stories. Not one of them was the same story. And she was like, that's what nonfiction is essentially about. The truth of the world lies out there, but how you absorb it is so very different. And that's what it is, essentially, like, you know, our own processes and interpretations of. It's essentially about feelings, and I think you can never sort of break it down into objective. Like, there is a higher truth, but what is that? It's all an abstraction, and how you interpret it is how you see the world.
That's poetry. I think when we say we're telling.
That's a rare compliment, by the way. Like, yeah, I mean, this film has tested every fiber of our marriage. but yeah, go on.
I absolutely agree with the room, and I think when we say we're telling stories, what are we really doing? We're deconstructing the world around us, asking questions, sitting in uncomfortable answers, and it's a process of learning, unlearning for the self, and very conscious choices of what's rolling when, what's getting cut, what music is added, and we bring our own sense of memory and identity and biases, you know, into that act, and hope that, but it's that process, and so to ever think that all of it is objective, why should it be? It's not a news gathering.
Kind of goes back to what Jonas was saying about it being honest, right? As long as it's honest, whether it's subjective or not, we're going to receive it differently. Let's go to about you.
I recently watched my film again for the first time in a few months, I guess, and I had the unusual experience of, in certain moments, asking myself, what did she mean by that? And I actually liked that feeling, because I think I allowed myself, while making the film, while shooting it and while editing it, and the choices that I made, to allow for the audience to have a multiplicity of meanings to take away. And sometimes I don't even necessarily know what something will mean, but it just feels right for some reason. Like, why is there the CEO of a cosmetics company talking about how if you work hard, your dreams will come true? And then we cut to these shots of these glow-in-the-dark jellyfish in an aquarium. I don't know, but it felt right to me for some reason. And yeah, I think for me, you know, everyone has their own answer about what the documentary process is for them, and I think that's something really special about the form. For me, I don't see documentary as separate from other forms of cinema. That said, I still think that, of course, we still have great responsibility to the people who appear in our films. And in that sense, it's important to always be transparent about your ideas up front, and not to make something that's manipulative in terms of trying to make someone appear in a certain way.
I just want to open it up for you all to talk to each other, because when do you know when the film is done? Because there's so much to continue to explore, but at some point you gotta be like, we're done. Like you said, it's testing every part of our marriage. But I'm just curious for you all to open it up and talk with each other. When do you know, do you watch your film after? You just said you just recently watched it. For how long? How long between when you first watched it?
It's been maybe 4 or 5 months since I watched it.
What is the process like for you all?
We actually thought we had the film and it was ready, and we'd been editing it for a whole year, and the festival deadline was approaching, and so we just closed the edit, picture lock, and a day later we used to spend a lot of time in our little balcony in a highly polluted city at night, so we'd be having these chats, and I asked Sushmit, do you think it's there? And he said, I don't think it's there. And that was so crushing, because we were exhausted and we felt like we'd given it everything. And he said, I can't do this anymore. I just physically am spent. I don't think I can go back with anything fresh. And then I was just like, give me 2 days. And so I just went into a room, spent 2 days there, and it was the same film, but I just moved things on the edit, made some things sharper, and just like shut everything out and made notes, copious notes. And then sat down and said, I think this is what we should do. He was a sport, and we put it together. In 5 days, we sort of like remade the film. And by the end of it, we were just like, this is the film. Even if no festival takes it, this is the film I set out to make. And I think that crucible was so important. The pain and the exhaustion was important, because we're convinced that this is it. It's really like falling in love, when it happens. But you have to struggle with it.
Yeah. I mean, you were talking about the mean, and you're having intimate conversations, and I'm sure you had so many different verticals and ways in which it could have went. But how did you know when it was like, I'm done, it's done?
It's difficult when you work with people who are alive. It's kind of a work in progress. Like, how do you kind of decide? Okay, that's it. But to me, there's really like two very different things that kind of decides it. And one is a feeling, like you have a feeling, okay, now we're there. And especially in the edit, you kind of have a feeling, okay, now it's there. And then when you reach that, you, to me at least, I can go on forever just doing like tweaks, like little tweaks. And then it needs to be a decision, okay, done. And then the other thing is, budget. And it's very boring, but it's really, at some point you don't have any food and you need to kind of, okay, I need to do something else now, So I think to me it's really, a feeling and budget that really decides when a film is done.
Yeah, I heard something that made me realize, in this room that, the festivals, there's a couple of big festivals, and they've probably done more than anybody in the world for getting films finished, because they have a date, and you find, and it's serious, like all the labs can't do any work, the sound mixers are all busy, you've got to book ahead. It's festival deadlines so. But for me, one of the things in the edit room, we have a saying that we're just making the film different. We're not making it any better. We're just, and you can make a film different for the rest of your life, but your version after version, I say, okay, cut. We're not making it any better. Let's just go back to the other version and we're done. So one thing that happened weirdly for Attica is that we realized about a year out that we could make the 50th anniversary date. And so the film premiered at Toronto Film Festival 50 years to the day that the rebellion broke out. And so at some point that was okay. If we can do that, and then when Toronto accepted it, we're like, okay, we're gonna make this date.
It's also weird with me. I totally forgot as far as editing is concerned. Like with records, I have to have a goosebump feeling. Like I get goosebumps every time I feel like, okay, now it's ready. You know, the pandemic was one thing, but then George Floyd was another thing. And that's in a matter of weeks. And it's weird that my original ending of the film, I felt like my original ending, I wanted Mavis Staples and Mahalia Jackson to have like the last say. And I thought like, that's gonna be the magic moment. And then, you know, starting in April, once the protest and everything happened, my producer was like, I think Nina Simone should be the last word with this because her thing is more fiery. And, you know, but it's like, do you really want to like mess with a perfect Rubik's Cube thing? Like, we just got a few more things and it's perfect. And it's so weird that putting what I thought was my ending in the middle and putting Nina Simone from the middle to the end, it made it, again, it changed the film. It made it new and it resonated and felt more fiery because, you know, I was told that with the original ending with Mavis Staples and Mahalia Jackson, it felt like an ideal, like, kumbaya Hollywood ending. And with Nina Simone, it felt like this is what people are feeling right now. And again, like time just, yeah. And then once that happened, then I felt like, okay, now I got goosebumps. I feel like this is my fourth record or, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Justin, I know I got this idea from you, but I just want to come to you too. Like when you know it's done.
Yeah, similar to a lot of people, the festival deadlines were super helpful. And I worked backwards, actually, I think 3 years backwards from a deadline for a festival. And I made that deadline, but I didn't get into the festival. But, you know, when we got that first rejection, it allowed me to go back in, open up the project file, and just like be more weird with it. I kind of let myself be more me, almost. Once I got that initial rejection, there was almost something freeing about it. Like I didn't have to be this like buttoned up version of what I thought the film should be. So I kind of let myself go further with the film after that rejection. And then kept editing up until, once we got accepted to Tribeca, then I kept editing up until literally the day when my colorist had to come and take the drive physically out of my hands. I was making tweaks, and you know, I don't feel like I'm done. If I'm gonna be honest, I watch it, I edit it in my head. That's part of why I don't like watching it, because I see it and it's like an old friend, and there are places that I love about it, but then there are places where I'm like, I wish I did this or this, but you know, I take comfort in what you said, Stanley, that it's just different. You know, maybe once you get to a certain place, it's just different. You could keep changing it forever.
You spoke about the rejection, and it's like sometimes I personally feel that the rejection is like freedom. It gives you more permission. So when you said, oh, the rejection, it just made me be more weird about it. It made me kind of like go into that space. And I know this industry is all about rejection and all about being told no. I'm curious, you talked about the pain and exhaustion that you feel in putting a film together. Like when you're, campaign aside, right? Campaigning for the film is one thing, but what is your peace when you're so involved in something that may or may not be joyful to watch, or may not be celebratory, or may not dive into different darker paths? What is your peace? What is your community? How do you step out of the dark hole that is the 2 days you were locked in the room to step away? How do you all do that?
Who wants that one first?
Well, I'll say that I mean, for our film, it is just a lot of trauma, and like interviewing the people, sitting with them in their trauma. This is a film where the state, lowercase s and capital S, American state, massacred 39 people, right? But again, I'll also say, making this film, sitting in my little pandemic box, Stanley's in his little pandemic box, while all of the everything was happening outside, in some ways, working on the film was peace, because it was an escape from all of that. I happen to live, where I live in Brooklyn, is on a protest route. So I saw all of the George Floyd things literally outside my window. I live like not far from Barclays, so people go down my street. I watched the police descend on a protester. I heard her screaming outside my window, right? I live across the street from a hospital where there were body bags piled up, right? So being in the trauma of Attica was peace in a weird way, because it gave me distance and kind of get out of my head about all of the chaos that was happening literally outside my window in the world.
Being creative, I think, was my way of finding peace. But then I also learned to embrace silence, which I'd never done in my adult life. And now I've morphed into the person I used to laugh at, like as far as like meditating and yoga and silence, and it was almost a necessary rite of passage. Because even doing this film, like I went in kicking and screaming, and just to embrace something without living in fight or flight, as I would normally do, was different. So this film made me at peace. I love that.
I think when you create something that's long drawn out, it kind of consumes you completely, becomes the center of your life. And both of us doing it together, I think our families understood, but then eventually just like became this one thing that we were obsessed with. And so many times it felt like everything was going up in flames. Is this thing ever going to get made? Is anybody ever going to watch it? These were, I have deep moments of self-doubt. And I think the best therapy that I arrived at is having a group of friends who have nothing to do with cinema or philosophy or anything. They're just so happy in things that I usually critique them for, which is like, you're so on the surface. You're not really engaging. And, in these conversations, when I have them over, I'm hanging with them, it doesn't matter whether I make this film or not. The world is not going to be, saved or not saved if I don't make this thing or not. And that kind of distance from the urgency, immediacy, and the passion of it, I found really, really therapeutic. Just talk about stuff that doesn't matter or matters a lot to other people, social media, or just generally, like, banter really helps me calm down and recenter myself and go, okay, I don't need to be so pressurized about getting everything right.
No, but I can totally echo, being with friends who know me well and not just as a filmmaker, and just, be with a group of people who talk about other stuff than filmmaking. It's really nice. And I'm going to be a little banal, but say, my kids, just coming home and getting a hug from my daughter is amazing, or looking at them sleep. I think I haven't found the place. It's a lot of different places, and I'm always kind of looking for, okay, where do I find that? And sometimes, it's falling asleep while I watch a football, what you call soccer here, a soccer match. Sometimes it's cooking, sometimes it's going for a long walk. So I haven't found the place, but it's always kind of looking for something that kind of just gives like a bit of headspace. But really being with close friends who see me as something else than a filmmaker is really kind of the best place.
Yeah, and to wrap up this interview here today, I'm curious as to, you all sit here as Oscar nominees, history. You all have made history as this, and what would you tell your younger self now sitting here as an Oscar nominee about your life, about your journey?
I would give the same advice that was the best advice that was given me, when I started making films. This older guy said, just enjoy the journey of making films, and the people you meet and the experiences you have and, the times you have and all of the process, because, the other stuff is not real. I'll see films that I've done, years ago, and I can't remember scenes that I cut. I'm like, oh, I thought I cut that scene. But I remember the people and I remember the things, and I think that's really one of the most important things.
I think I think of every person who told me that I couldn't do something, and I just say, thank that person, because that really pushed me many, many times to do the exact thing and more. So yeah, just thank that person. Don't be pissed with them.
I love it.
It's a bit surreal to be actually responding to this question, because as a kid I used to watch the Academy Awards with my father back home in India, and it would be an early morning thing, and then he passed, and it sort of became like a ritual for me every year to do this, to be here in this space and then to be walking. I just feel like this whole idea of as cliched as it sounds, but to dream and to continue to dream and to never let go of where you come from and what your roots are, and the tree will expand, but like, you know, hold on to who you are. And as they say, like in our part of the world, life will find a path for you, you know. So it doesn't necessarily need to be the Academy Awards or whatever, but like life will find a path for you. So yeah, and life found this path for us, and this is just a little milestone along the journey.
Oh, a little milestone? I love it.
Well, I mean,
I step up my game.
I love it. What about you, Amir?
Okay, so at the age of 10, you know, my father was an oldies doo-wop singer back in the 50s, and so I grew up in a showbiz family. So at the age of 10, I used to be really obsessed with reviews. So all my walls were adorned with like all these Rolling Stone reviews of like artists I like, and then, you know, I'd read like Peter Travers, and like I was obsessed with reviews. And then when I started my career as a musician, you know, critical acclaim was everything to me because, you know, the Roots weren't the type of band that would, you know, we didn't have singles on the radios, like Prestige and everything was like, that's what kept us on like the label that we were on. The fact that, you know, they have so much critical acclaim, and they, you know, we were good business for them to see, like, hey, here's our band, the Roots, and they don't sell like this person over here, but you know, they're Prestige. And it's really weird that it's taken this film, like as a person that's done music for 20 years, to divorce myself from like not looking at my Metacritic rating every 3 seconds, or wondering if Pitchfork is going to give this album a 9.1, or if this gets 4.5 stars and this thing, like I was so addicted to the drug of critical acclaim, and I didn't have that to fall back on with this movie. It's so weird that I do this film, and even when Tabitha announced to us that we won Sundance, like I didn't get it. Because in my mind, it was like, I gotta get to the 30 Rock cafeteria before the cereal bar closes. So when she's announcing to me, I'm like, wait, this is a contest or something? Wait, let me get my cereal first. And they wanted to ambush me with this surprise of, congrats, you won Sundance. And I was like, wait, what's going on here? And so I realized that I had to realize how to be creative again, making this movie, because I'm so fight or flight and living in my brain, like I kind of forgot how to live in my heart. And yes, I know I love music, and everyone's like, oh, Questlove, he loves music. But it's so weird that when I just wanted to make a cool ass documentary, like, you know, and just maybe they'll show this in schools or something, without the thing of, will I get to the Oscars one day, or will I? And it's so weird that now it's like the magic happens when you don't plan it. And I needed this film to teach me how to be a creative again. So from now on, I'm learning just from a personal place to live in my heart, which really isn't encouraged when you're living in the hood. You know, you have to use your wits and your brain to survive. And now I'm just learning to calm down and just live in your heart, and what do you feel? So that's what it's taught me.
You know, I think to end up sitting here, which is still for me completely surreal, like I'm like not in my body right now, like I'm in this room with all of you people doing this. But I think to end up here, to have the privilege of doing this work, it means that somewhere along the way you made a decision to take the road less traveled. Not just once, but again and again and again. And for me, every time I've made that decision, it has always been petrifying. And so I think what I've learned and what I would say to my past self is trust yourself, trust your gut. It's gonna land you in this room, and maybe spend a little less time being afraid and more time just trusting the decisions that you're making are the ones that are right for yourself.
Yeah, like trusting your voice is really kind of a key thing. And I think also surrounding yourself with people who can kind of push you, you know, people who inspire you and can push you, and still trusting your voice. And then I think the best advice I was given actually was, you know, don't buy a big house, don't buy a expensive car because you're not going to earn a lot of money doing documentaries. So if you want to do that, live cheap so you can do what you want and kind of, really, creating life around yourself where you're able to do what you want and not being dependent on having to pay a huge bill every month.
I like how practical that advice is. Yeah, I think to echo what a lot of people are saying, it's very surreal to end up here. It's not something that I, in my wildest imagination, expected for this film. And I guess I would tell myself, you really can do things your own way. Because it's so easy to fall into this trap of feeling like, what is the path to success? Or what is the path to doing the thing that I want to do in the right way? And then sometimes when I'd watch films and see someone make some crazy choice, I would tell myself, oh, you can do that? You can do that in a movie? And so I would just tell myself, yeah, you can do that, and it's okay. And you don't have to worry about getting to the other side, because like you were saying, Questlove, like the magic, I think, really does happen when you're not trying to orchestrate it. And I would also tell myself, I used to be extremely shy and have like fear of public speaking, which I still do, but not the way I used to. If I knew then what I know now, I think I would be way too scared to continue. So I'm glad that I didn't know that I would have to do so many public speaking engagements, because otherwise I'd be like, no way, it's too hard, it's too scary. So I'm kind of glad I was naive in that way, and it kind of like crept on me in that way.
Embrace your fear. That's good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You all, I want to thank you for sharing your love of art, love of cinema, sharing your heart, opening it up.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining Academy panels. And congratulations on your Oscar nomination.
Thank you so much.